It's time for Tycoons of Small Biz, spotlighting the true backbone of the American economy, the true tycoons of business in America, the owners, founders, and CEOs of small businesses. The show's hosts, Austin Peterson and Landon Mance, are registered representatives of Lincoln Financial Advisors Corporation, a broker-dealer, member SIPC, and registered investment advisor. The views expressed by your hosts, Austin and Landon, are not necessarily the views of Lincoln Financial Advisors. Backbone Planning Partners is a marketing name for registered representatives of Lincoln Financial Advisors. Now let's lean in as Austin and Landon connect with this week's Tycoons.
Good afternoon, Tycoons, and welcome to today's episode of Tycoons of Small Biz. I'm your host here, as always, Austin Peterson, coming to you live from our studios at Business Radio X in Tempe, Arizona. If this is the first time you're listening to our podcast, we've been doing this for a little over 2 years, 106th episode, I believe it is today. We put together this podcast for small business owners by small business owners. Landon and I and our other partners, Ryan and Gary, believe that the small business owner community is truly the backbone of the American economy. And so we put together this podcast to highlight them, let them share their stories, and provide advice to other business owners throughout the country and throughout the world. So with that today, we definitely have some tycoons here with us in the studio. We've got Breck Rice, Chief Revenue Officer, and Todd Delano, CEO of ServRX, based here in Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So, Todd, why don't we start with you? You're the CEO of the organization. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself personally? So, where did you grow up? What are you passionate about? Do you have any children? Are you married? Where did you go to college? Whatever you'd like us to know about you personally.
Thanks. I grew up in the Houston area, so I'm the youngest of 3 siblings. First generation, I guess, to get a college degree. Started at a junior college, went to Texas State University from there, and then traveled west 3 days after graduating. So went to Los Angeles and had a cup of coffee in LA as a stockbroker, and then moved to Phoenix to work for a pharmaceutical company 22 years ago now. So time flies. So established roots here in Phoenix for 3 or 4 years. Got promoted in the pharmaceutical industry back to Houston. Found my wife, had a kid, and then was disenfranchised with corporate America at 30 years old and decided to come out to Phoenix. And, I'm sure we'll get into it a bit later, but, started one company, started a second company, started a third company, and here we are. And today we have 3 kids, 17, 11, and 4, and 3 boys, and, live in the area, and we're in the community, we're here for life. So that's the very short journey of who I am and where we're at. And want me to get into the healthcare company now and talk about the journey with ServRX, or do you want to?
Let's hear about Breck's personal story first, and before we jump over to Breck. So I grew up in a family of boys. My mom had 4 boys, but with her second marriage, she married a man who had another boy and then also a girl. So we do have one girl in there, but I know what it's like to have a house full of boys.
Yeah, spaced apart every 6 years. I don't think we can continue the trend. Shauna's 4. We'll see in 2 years if we continue to the fourth child, but I think we're done. But it keeps it interesting for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Breck, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your family, your story a little bit as well.
Yeah, so actually born here in Arizona, the youngest of 6 children. My dad always said his first 4 boys were girls, so I have 4 older sisters and 1 older brother. My parents were school teachers. My dad was a science teacher at Chandler Junior High many moons ago. And for summer vacations, they would travel. And so we made it all the way up to British Columbia and up into Alaska. And on the way back down, they liked the area in British Columbia, central BC, bought 880 acres, and we moved up there. So got some international experience, if you can call it that, in British Columbia, Canada. Got way too cold up there for my mom, so we moved back to the States. So moved just back to Arizona about 8.5 years ago now to team up with Todd and start ServRX.
Awesome. I tell you, I've spent some time in British Columbia. It's beautiful, right? And I just my brain kind of thinks, well, how in the world did a school teacher buy 880 acres of land anywhere right? Now it was a different time, of course, but still, that just seems crazy to be able to buy 880 acres on a teacher's salary.
Yeah, we had a few acres here in out in Chandler. I think they had like 10 or 12 acres out there, and but yeah, the conversion was very beneficial going to Canada for sure. Selling that property and then moving back to the States, I think got him another 10 acres. So kind of puts things in perspective.
Yeah. So came back the same direction. It'd be like me moving back to California now, right?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Todd, tell us about ServRX. You were in the pharmaceutical industry, but you were disenfranchised with the corporate side of things. So what? Tell us where we went from there.
Yeah, so that's where it begins, right? When I was working in Arizona, I had several drugs in the portfolio as a sales rep. So I'd call on internal medicine, orthopedic surgeons, and pain doctors. And so really got a good feel for what happens in the medical community, particularly doctors and their interactions with patients and their interaction with their own staff, that little ecosystem of primary care and specifically with pain. And that was the genesis for ServRX. I had known I'd wanted to be an entrepreneur. You just, and people ask all the time, what does it take? Or I kind of want to be one. And I always say it chooses you. I don't think you choose it. And for me, the risk of staying in corporate America or the fear of knowing where I was going to be 20, 30 years later was way more fearful than leaving corporate America. And so for me, it really wasn't a choice. I don't think staying was an option. And so we'd moved back to Phoenix. I had heard of this concept of physicians dispensing medication in their office. Certainly had a lot of contacts within the physician network. We're kind of, if you're an entrepreneur, you don't start with your first business. You've kind of always tinkered along the way. So I've learned things along the way about how to start businesses, lost a little money in real estate, lost a little bit of money in a few other small businesses, and made some silly mistakes along the way. So use that experience combined with my, the relationships in Arizona, helped a doctor in Tucson set up a pharmacy in his office. And this was in a niche specifically for workers' compensation. And in business, and once you get to a certain ecosystem or level of, I don't want to call it business success, I'll say, you realize there's a common theme in small, but semi, like this airwave of businesses that solve problems that are too complex for the average small person to figure out.
Yep.
But too small for the big guys to want to insource and figure out, right? Either
Sure.
from time, whatever it is, expertise, time management, all those things. And so that's what we did in the field of workers' compensation and in specific with pharmacy. Now, the problem we're solving for doctors was twofold. One, there was a revenue component, and it's well known the lack, the revenue, decline of revenue, and physicians working harder and harder to make less. That's a common theme in business or in healthcare. But the second part, as it relates to work-related injuries, was that there's a lot of paper. It's a paper and labor intense. It's half medical, half legal. So there's issues getting prescriptions filled at the pharmacy. So oftentimes there's more time with the physician's office spent, managing denials of patient medications. And another thing that's common in the pain market from the patient's perspective is the stigma that's sometimes associated with a work-related injury in particular, or God forbid you need a pain med or a muscle relaxer or whatever you need at that moment. So there's some anxiety and stigma around that. And the solution we gave the physicians solved both of those. We were able to help as a consultant set up a pharmacy in their practice, help manage it. In fact, save the doctor time. It sounds counterintuitive to say you would set up a pharmacy in a medical practice and yet save them time. But if done right, it did for those doctors who were maybe had a high volume of workers' compensation patients in their practice. So we did that successfully with one doctor in Tucson and commuted from North Scottsdale. So what I thought, promised the wife, hey, 60, 90 days in, we'll figure this out. We'll scale up and I'll be back, I'll be home for dinner.
My favorite thing though is that you told her you're also going to take a pay cut to do this too, right?
Well, of course, every entrepreneur sells their wife on the fact, hey, we're going to go from a corporate sales job, 401k. I think it was a 75% pay cut I promised her. And I successfully probably only took about a 72% pay cut. So I outperformed year one. Didn't tell you that then I took 120 or 30% pay cut and was negative for the next 2 or 3 years, and didn't promise her that. But Yeah, the story goes, was commuting from North Scottsdale, 2.5 hours each direction. If you know anything about Tucson, you get off I-10, and if you're inland at all, it's another 30 or 40 minutes
Yep.
before you get anywhere. So, that was the genesis. Got really good at, from medication management to the IT required, the reporting to the state board, the logistics of it, and patient management and care. And what we realized, though, was those were the easy parts. It was easy to scale inside Arizona and got good at it, but try not to get too myopic for this conversation. But the fact is, each state has its own ecosystem, its own payer mix, its own algorithm. Like a lot of small businesses or any state, any business, oftentimes there's state requirements, there's national requirements, and
Yep.
in healthcare in particular, and in particular in workers' comp, that subset, there's a lot more complexity with laws, rules, regulations, and so we realized if we were going to scale out of Arizona, that was the toughest problem to solve. It wasn't, we got the med management down, we had the right IT, we had the right staffing, we had the right, had the formula down. And that's where Breck came into the story. I needed a solution to help scale the financial side, and Breck, in his former job in a healthcare entity, called the doctor's office as someone looking for more workers' comp, more physicians focused on workers' compensation pharmacy to expand their services. And that part was a match made in heaven, at least from a solution standpoint. Except if you're an entrepreneur, you're oftentimes not the best employee, and you're certainly not the best channel partner or vendor. Not by purpose, but it's a natural curiosity. And if we can solve a problem, then we're going to solve a problem. If we can learn, we're going to learn. And if we can execute ourselves, we're going to execute. And so that's really where ServRX took off from, I would say, a pharmacy med management solution to the light bulb went off that no, we're a claims processing, we're a healthcare IT and a financial firm, not a consultant company, not a pharmacy, not a med management company. And it was that part of the complexity with the healthcare entity that he was involved with that was ignoring the niche of physicians having pharmacies in their office, and the management companies that helped didn't understand the complexity of the payer mix, the algorithms, the IT solutions that were required. So if I've done anything effectively in like any of the businesses I've ran or scaled, it's I understand how to recruit leaders. I understand how to lead leaders well and then get out the way. And that's probably what I did more effectively. And Breck's one of those leaders of a handful of people that really make ServRX successful. So that's the story. And fast forward as we scaled state to state, complexity, it didn't scale just, 3 states was 5 times more complex than 2 states. They didn't get easier. It actually kind of got more complicated. Had to build our own proprietary IT. So you just kind of learned how to solve problems and scale it and figure it out. And fast forward to today, we have several thousand pieces of paper that come to 2 PO lock boxes, one in Las Vegas, one in Philadelphia. And we have hundreds of thousands of dollars we reconcile daily, $400 receivable size. These are, meds that are 50 to a few $100s in size and checks. And then what happens in workers' comp, and especially in our niche of the out-of-network portion of the spin, it comes via paper. You may have 1 patient on a check, you may have 10, but we fill meds for 15 to 20,000 patients a month in all 50 states. And so the ability for our IT to recognize bank lock boxes, they get pieces of paper. Think of our own like junk mail. I was sifting through the junk mail today to sift, the stuff you needed to get to. And we have several thousand pieces of paper each day go to our PO lock boxes. They stacked with checks, stacked without checks. The ones without checks are the useful information. And then those all get PDF'd. Then they get sent to our IT team, and then we reconcile to the penny within 48 hours. So that's, if we've done anything really well from a business infrastructure standpoint, it was the ability to scale from one office to an IT solution that is able to manage, what is now going on our 13th year and over $800 million of receivables processed at an average size of a few $100 from over 4,000 payers around the country. So that's the secret sauce. That had you known that was the task early on, I'm not a smart person. It wasn't an epiphany of I could do this. It was almost foolishly solving problems, scaling up, finding the right people. And it's more, I don't say I'm not a visionary. It's you find good people, then you look backwards and you're like, holy cow, how did we do that?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, what happened with us. And so we're in a unique niche. Most people are not foolish enough to get into it. And so we're protected by this fact. Today there's 60,000 pharmacies in the country. We really focus on the community pharmacies. Think of even Bashas' as an example, grocery store chains, just not the big 5 or 7 you think of. And there's about 25,000 of the 60 are community pharmacies, and we're contracted with 12,000 of them, so 1 and 2. And any given month, 3 to 4,000 of those pharmacies will use our service. And in particular, the service today is if you walk, any of us today, if we were hurt on the job, let's use construction as an example. It's an easy, oftentimes sprains and strains, lower back issues. You pull a back muscle, you're at the urgent care. You're hurt at 9 a.m., you're at urgent care by 10:30, by 1 p.m., you're with a prescription at your local pharmacy. But then the pharmacy knows it's work-related injury. So you don't pull out your major medical card, you don't pay cash for the copay. And if you're the pharmacy or pharmacy owner or farm tech, how do you adjudicate the prescription? So a typical process we're all used to is if we go out of state to a pharmacy we've never used, but let's say you're with a major medical insurance provider, your name's in a database, right?
Yeah.
So if they have your birth date, date of injury, date of birth, your group number, whatever they have on that card, they can look you up in a database and they'll tell you it's a $20 or $30 copay. On the other side of the transaction on the computer screen you don't see is an adjudication and acceptance from the carrier. And they know they're getting another, whatever the other part of it is, 30, 40, 50, 60 bucks on the backside. And away you go. Well, in this particular story of workers' comp, how does that happen? It doesn't. They believe it's a work-related injury. By law, they cannot require a copay or your major medical. Now they have to wait. Think of even an auto injury where you have to wait for an adjuster. They have to assess the case, and it's often 1 to 4 weeks before you're dropped into the database. And so there's a leap of faith that they'll even get paid. So that's the solution we provide. We bridge that gap for traditional pharmacies. We allow them to contract with us, adjudicate or process to us real time. And we make a very complicated and risky transaction feel seamless and integrated. So obviously we'll take on the risk, and we have a lot of man hours involved. So we'll pay a discount on the receivable, but when you factor everything in, like any good business, you're only there because you add value, and it's more valuable to use you. So that's why they would use us. Conversely, why can we do it better than any one pharmacy? Like a lot of businesses, economies of scale, right? When you're in a niche in anything, it's always comes down to expertise and economies of scale. And a good example of that piece of it is if we have to call a carrier or payer because you're an injured worker and we have to sit on the phone, there's no getting around phone time. But if it takes us 15 minutes to confirm or verify the information for one injured worker, well, if we're talking to a national insurance firm, one patient, 15 minutes costs a certain amount of dollars. It's easy to quantify. We have them on the phone. This is all we're doing. We may have 10 more. So now in 25 minutes, we can get done. What if you were on your own would take you 15 minutes, and you collapse these types of, that's just one part of the tree of getting your claim paid, and you collapse all those together, and that's the business. And we do it to the tune of thousands of prescriptions a month, and now hundreds of millions of dollars later.
Awesome. So a lot to unpack there. I'm going to come back to that. So Breck, he mentioned, one of the big things that Todd says he does well is hires the right leaders and gets out of their way, basically, right? So tell us about your journey to arrive at ServRX. What was it about Todd or the organization that brought you here?
Yeah. So back when I first met Todd, I was working for a firm that had established themselves as the go-to for third-party billing, specifically for workers' comp. And so through acquisition and other means, we'd pretty much bought up all of our competitors. And so everyone used this one platform. So Todd was reaching out to me for contracting so that he could use a third-party payer so he could expand. And we were going through the whole steps of putting this agreement together. And at the 11th hour, I had to pull the contract. So the company I was working for had a book out for sale, and they were being acquired. So everything had to cease, unfortunately, at that time. So Todd, being a smart guy and not just being fine with that, started asking all the right questions. Well, who else out there in the industry does what you do? And I gave him the backstory. Well, there was this company out of Utah that we acquired. And so there's not really anyone in this space. Once this program goes to, George Lucas could have wrote this script, because it honestly was like this beautiful little program that was like little Anakin Skywalker, who was taking care of people and really doing the right thing, that was getting sold off to the dark side, to a big pharmacy benefit manager, a PBM. And so that left a hole in the marketplace for a true independent third-party payer. So Todd asked all the right questions. He asked who the IT experts were that were in the industry, and he started connecting those dots to fill that niche, now that there was going to be a hole there. I had some handcuffs. I couldn't immediately jump on board and go work for Todd initially, but my right-hand person that worked with me, she didn't have those same restrictions. And so Todd tells the story the best.
Oh, I'm not sure I could do better than that. I will say, well, let me frame that piece in the larger narratives, right? So to back up a bit, Breck had mentioned something for those people who aren't in healthcare. There's two sides, make no mistake about it. In this axis of healthcare, there is payers and there are providers. And there's no getting around that, right? The payers are the insurance industry. They underwrite premiums, they underwrite in the industry, but they also set the rules. And so it's a very powerful side of the equation. And the providers we think of as physicians, but they're everything from anyone on that side: pharmacies, doctors, the labs, the x-rays, anyone who provides the service to the patient. And patients are their friends. They care for the patient. There's a very unique and interesting relationship that happens with the payer side. So what we do at ServRX is we are provider friendly, right? We're patient and provider friendly, meaning we maximize the service for this side, and we sit at odds with the payer side for contractual relationship reasons that are pretty complex. If you want to ask me more, I'll share more with that piece of it. So that's the Star Wars narrative that Breck was framing. The part of the story he mentioned about kind of our journey as a business, that it is a pivotal point where in business you're presented with a crisis. I'd already sold some accounts in the South and Southeast. I had no solution in hand. Like a true entrepreneur, you don't fake it necessarily, but you sell it, then you figure it out. I had sold it and didn't have it figured out about how we were going to process and pay and do all the things that needed to happen. But I was counting on a contract that was taking longer than it should have through the big entity Breck spoke of. Now learning that it was slowed down for other reasons internally, and then cut from me within days or weeks of having the contract in hand. And has happened then, has happened several times since in ServRX. There's these moments where there's a recoil from entrepreneurs, right? And what do you do? And the ability to kind of calm your brain down and compartmentalize. Don't be a victim. What happened? No blaming. Just to literally look around the room and say, where do we go from here? What does it mean? What are the threats? How real are they? What's the timetable? How long? There's this process of assessing the damage and then seeking the opportunities, right? And you can only do that if you stay calm and vigilant. And it's, not to use a war zone lightly. It's not a real war zone, but psychologically it is, and it always is. And you have to be comfortable with that fact that it's never static and never easy. But that was the opportunity I mentioned to you guys. I'm really good at, maybe, I don't know, leading people, finding people, whatever that story is. But rather than recoiling when Breck said that, rather than calling the client saying I couldn't pick up the accounts, rather than doing all these other things, staying small, I jumped on planes immediately and jumped into people's backyards, into their restaurants, and flown to Tennessee and talked to people in Utah and sold people on a vision. Because I know anytime there's big acquisitions, there's people that are left behind. There's parts of the industry that people were passionate about that's left behind. When I knew naturally, if you're a provider entity, you're bought by a payer specific entity, there's going to be some damage, and there's going to be people that want to continue to solve the problems. And so that was the pivot. And that's when ServRX went from a full service management company to what we are today, right? Which is a claims processing company and serves a niche that other company, quite frankly, had left behind. So that's the piece of the story. And that was a really, I would say, a fork in the road in our journey.
Yeah. So it becomes a little complicated because I as far as I envision it, and I would not pretend to say I fully understand everything that you just explained and how the process works, but you guys are essentially right in the middle between the payer and the provider, right? And you're trying to make it easier on both sides and probably better financially on both sides would be my guess. Is that fair to say?
Almost.
Okay.
It's fair to say that we make it easier and we make it financially beneficial to the payer side. What's unique in workers' comp is you're not required to sign into networks to have access to the patient lives. And think about what that means. So if your family, for example, you're signed on to a major medical plan, the providers have to be contractually signed on with that major medical plan.
Yep.
So then the fee structures, the IT integrations, these things are negotiated, and it's not seamless, but it's the infrastructure is in place to manage that pay cycle and information share. In most states, insurance companies cannot obligate providers to go into network to service these patients. Think about what that means. States set rules that protect workers that work in any state. They set the rules and they set fee schedules. Payers can, if they choose to, underwrite patient lives and put contracts in place with large employers in those states. But they can't demand or dictate that the provider side signs into networks to get access to those patient lives. Are you tracking that?
Yep.
And that is the pain point. So you have payers who control the money, often control legislation, often control, the rules of the game. But there's one little rule they can't control in workers' comp, which is you can't obligate the providers to sign into your network. They're used to telling the provider, hey, Mr. Pharmacy, you want access to this 1 million lives in Arizona? Here's our PBM contract. Here's our rates. Take it or leave it. The other pharmacy will if you don't. And depending on the size of your pharmacy and, economy, law of economics, right? The more leverage you have, the better rate you have. The less leverage you have, the worse rates you get. We come in and almost serve as, I would describe it as a union almost to the small providers, which to me is any independent pharmacy, is anybody who's a business owner who's not part of a large entity. And there's power in us because when they process the claims to ServRX, we now own the rights to those receivables. And now large insurance company doesn't owe $100 to 1,000 pharmacies. They owe ServRX $100,000. And that's a different conversation, right?
Yeah.
Both economically for us, it's more advantageous for us to be aggressive. When I say aggressive, legally right, what's legally obligated for them to pay. And number two, we know a lot more than the independent pharmacies with how to get paid to make sure your notes and everything's properly submitted. Because what they want is one technical misstep on paperwork, one technical misstep on a note, and they want the gray area to be able to deny. And then, to be fair, they would argue we just have to have it all buttoned up, right? We need all 10 things in. If you got a 95, 9.5 on your homework, it's an F, and you get a 0, you don't get a 95. And so, our job is to make sure they make A's. And so that's the difference though in a normal. So we do we would argue we help the industry, and by helping the industry, we help the payers, because if you continue to deny access to medical care, the attorneys would love nothing more than to file claims. And like anything else, how many claims have to be filed before the pain we create is much smaller than that pain. So that's a nuance, but it's an important one to know, because you see the juxtaposition of us being this middleman between the big boys, the payers, and then the providers. So
yeah, the individual patient, their experience, the way that we've set it up, just to take it one step further, is a no hassle, no delays. They can get same day service if they're using one of our in-network pharmacies. The benefit to the pharmacy as a provider is we're mitigating their risk. We're allowing them, go ahead and dispense the medication. We'll cover you. So we have a contract with them that we're going to pay them whether we collect or not. So they can go ahead and just take care of the patient, move forward with their day, taking, on the next script that they've got to fill, and the patient gets taken care of that same day too. So that's very, very unique about that structure, because no one is pre-enrolled into workers' comp like you are in all the other healthcare plans, your major medical and Medicare and all those plans. So the injury day is when they finally get enrolled. And so eligibility hasn't even been set up yet, but they still need medical attention and they need medicine. And so we make the wheels go around. We take care of that to make sure that there's a no hassle, no delays opportunity for that patient. and that the pharmacy's risk has been mitigated on that as well too. So that's taking it even a step further in how much we're streamlining it for the payer side. Now the payer's going to pay the same amount whether we bill them or whether one of those other pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs that have been mentioned a couple of times, they're going to bill out about the same amount because each state has set up a state fee schedule. Most states do. There's some usual and customary states, but there's a state industrial commission usually comes together and say this is a fair and reasonable price to reimburse the pharmacy at. So we never bill above that. We bill at whatever the right price is. So does the pharmacy benefit manager if they're getting the claim. So go back to that company that I used to work with that was now the largest third-party payer is now going to the dark side, going to the payer side. So instead of helping patients and pharmacies, is now going to go over and be on the payer side and be owned by a big pharmacy benefit manager. Why would they want all of that information coming to them? So they could redirect all those claims into their existing networks, because those PBMs make $80 to $120 per transaction by doing that. Third-party payer passes that on, the most part of it. So we pay at about 70% of whatever the fee schedule is. The PBM pays the pharmacy at about minus 70% of the fee schedule.
Gotcha. So the injured worker, do they have any idea that this is all being administered by ServRX, or it's just on the back end at the pharmacy, they have a contract with you guys?
We're a business-to-business solution, so the patient has no idea. In fact, I mean, in a perfect world, they know nothing of, when it goes smooth, and for any new patients that are contracted with our services with the pharmacy, they have no idea of any of this. And so we don't spend a lot of time, one, directly marketing, or number two, even letting the local community know we exist. We really are a B2B, and we're white labeled or a very private solution. So I think we feel more like an insurance firm, behind the scenes, but there's a lot of heavy lifting that goes on behalf of the patients by us. And for us, we take pride in that, right? If you mentioned my journey, very short version of it, but when you are an underdog and you have an underdog mentality, and then you also have an entrepreneurial mentality, you take a lot of pride in servicing the community at need, whether it's individuals or whether it's small businesses. And so, for us, that's enough. We get enough pleasure from knowing that, getting the feedback from the pharmacies, who are the ones who really are the champions, right? They're the direct frontline workers who help the injured workers. So we're behind the scenes, but we're very much intimately involved, and we take great pride in that. And I'll also say, just regarding kind of the business journey, and when you're doing good for others, it doesn't have to be a direct benefit. Life is, you never do exactly what you want anyways. Like, we don't dream of workers' compensation. May want to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't wake up and say, man, if I can get into this complex, tedious, nefarious, I'm a kid who's ADD and not very detail oriented by nature growing up. In no world did I say, if I can just literally have 20,000 pieces of paper drop on me, I'm responsible for a day, and then have IT. But what you do is you solve problems for people. You realize you're good at something, and ultimately you set up a group of people around you that you enjoyed solving problems with. And that's what life's about, right? Friends, family. Life's tough. There's problems to solve. If you wake up and solve it with people that really have your best interests, and you're doing a good mission, then that's really the sweet part of the journey, and everything else takes care of itself. And we haven't had no turnover. So if you hire right and hire high, if you hire people before you're big, and we went from the executives, or the people I hired when we did less than $1 million in revenue. Last year we did $80+ million in revenue for the year. Same people, same executives that I was able to hire take a leap when we only had $1 million in revenue and negative earnings with not a lot of cash to burn, even, for the same people that's still involved. And so that's what's unique, to identify the industry experts, to make a fair by all sides, right? So where you're really partners in a deal. And by design, whether it's shares of the company, I've been very generous on purpose. When I say generous, it's an even exchange, but I have this abundance mentality, right? Of whether it's equity with the right executives, taking care of the people on the team, and also with taking chances. I mean, what we do is a math game. What we solve is we don't get, so if our collection rate's 82% on what we bill out, we don't get 82%. We either get 100 or 0.
Yeah.
Ours is a game of how many, and that's back to me as an ADD kid. My mom would tell me I was a C student. I said, Mom, I'm an A student. I only turn in 7 out of 10 of my projects, but make no mistake about it. When I turn them in, I'm really good at it. So that's our game, right? That's the math, and kind of back to the life philosophy that also very much translates to the micro part of the business, and then the macro philosophy of business and life is it's kind of like blackjack, right? Or I say UFC fighting too. You're not going to go undefeated, right? Like we're not Mayweather, we're not 50-0, but if I could be 9-7 and still be a champion, you're going to have a cauliflowered ear and you're going to have some few bruises. And so for me, and I'll hear people say, well, the universe is bad or people are bad. You can't trust. Yes, but for the fact that I only have to be right 51% of the time and play a bunch of hands and be consistent with how I play my hands. So as long as you play the game of business or life in a consistent manner, then if it's a 55%, if I'm right 55% of the time, I'm yielding a nice return. As long as I'm disciplined, I can live with the outcomes and don't put too much on one hand. And that's a philosophy that served me well in business and in life, where I continue to take these chances, and we take chances, and otherwise we couldn't have scaled as a company either, unless I as the leader was comfortable with, hey, we're going to take some losses in this state, we're going to calibrate, we're going to figure it out. And so that's the mentality kind of personally that kind of naturally aided, what is the service we provide.
Yeah. So a lot of different directions I want to take this, but let's take a quick break. We'll hear a quick call to action for our listeners, and we'll come back and unpack a little bit more about what you guys are doing. Hey there, Tycoons. Austin Peterson here, co-host of Tycoons of Small Biz. If you think you have what it takes to be considered a tycoon and you're wondering how you could become a featured guest, please follow and then message us at Tycoons of Small Biz on LinkedIn. We'd love to have a conversation with you to see if it is a mutually good fit, and if so, we'll get you scheduled for an interview. If you're unsure about being a guest on our podcast, but are contemplating selling your business over the next few years and you'd like to know what your business is worth, please also follow us and then message us on LinkedIn for your no obligation, informal valuation of your business. We look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for listening to the Tycoons of Small Biz podcast. And now, back to today's program. All right, Tycoons, welcome back to the program. We're here with Breck Rice and Todd Delano with ServRX here in Phoenix. We're talking about what they're doing really to disrupt the healthcare industry as far as I'm concerned. But we unpacked, quite a few things right before the break. And I want to talk a little bit about your philosophy about the business itself, right? Because there are a couple things. Entrepreneurs, you mentioned being ADD. A lot of entrepreneurs are ADD. I would probably say 85% or more of entrepreneurs are ADD. And so, first of all, I just want to mention that doesn't mean that you can't accomplish things, right? I mean, we all have difficult things that we deal with in life, and ADD is one of those. It could be ADHD, it could be a lot of different things, but we have the ability to accomplish whatever we put our minds to. A lot of it is being willing to take the risk, but then also one of the big things that you mentioned is surrounding yourself with the right people to kind of offset some of the weaknesses that you may be bringing to the table and couple those with the strengths that you have personally, right? So let's talk a little bit more about what the team looks like. And I'll frame it this way: is a lot of entrepreneurs, and in our business, this is what we do. We work with business owners day in and day out. And the hardest thing that most business owners have to overcome is letting go and letting others do what they do best, because a lot of them want to control everything. This is my baby. I built this. I started this. I took all the risk, and I'm still taking all the risk. But what advice would you give to business owners that are listening to the program as to how you've been able to let go and surround yourself with the right leaders to do what they need to do?
So I'm usually I would like to think I'm good at answering questions. This is a tricky one to me, because this is a little bit of, the way I would frame it is like learned behaviors, like, what you're born with versus what you learn. How malleable are we? And this is a really tough one to solve. So a lot of us as entrepreneurs are risk takers. A lot of us are ADD, but I do think you can bifurcate us into those two groups very quickly. And I'm not sure how you get those in one pond to jump to the other side, right?
Yeah.
So we're all fairly Socratic. We're all kind of, probably have this belief in ourselves. We can do certain things. We take risks. But the two camps, I've seen these camps, and we're very different. So I can't necessarily answer for that camp, but I will say that if you have the qualities to do that, you've had them early on. And so that's, that's more of a self-introspective question. And so if you're in the camp of saying, I have a hard time letting go and trusting, it's probably in every area of your life. And because I've never was born, I don't even have that trait, don't know what it looks like. So, not to make it about that, but an example of that. And, Breck's heard me tell the story. Went to 3 high schools, had a pretty tough upbringing. I was best man in 4 weddings from high schools, different high schools. And a 5th friend asked me to officiate his wedding. So I had this genetic component, right? It's not about me. I trust others. I love others. And that's carried me into business life. So I would just say that, the philosophy works. I mean, and it's the only philosophy to scale, right? So you nailed what the philosophy is, but how do you do that? If you're not part of that camp, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that. And Breck's a good example, though, of whether you're in my camp or not, the strategy is the same. You have to find industry experts, and you got to get out the way. You can't scale. Even with our internal employees, I'm a very empathetic, open person. I've learned early on, I can't get to know, I can know people, but you really can't dig in to everybody. You got to be selective for everyone's sake. It's not selfish. It's for the sake of the entity. You got to stay out the way of human relations. You got to trust people to put them in the right spot for those relationships. And you got to trust on the professional side. So Breck was the world-class industry expert on the PBM management and relationships with pharmacies. I hired the CIO that was an industry expert on that side. I hired a CFO when I only had a dozen employees before I scaled, 10x from there. And I hired a CFO that had public accounting experience, was a CPA, and worked for a big firm. And the list goes on and on. I have 5 or 7 executives around me that probably made 20% of what I could have made probably for 3 or 4 years had we not invested. But when you find those people, you got to find them. How do you emotionally get there? I don't know. But if you don't, you're never going to scale. You're never going to scale.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would follow that up with, you mentioned, I think you said, you went from $1 million in revenue or even less, obviously. And that's when you were starting to add this executive team. And last year, I think you said around 80 million, right? Mm-hmm. That's rarefied air, right? I mean, very, very, very few businesses in this country ever get to 80 million. Everybody thinks, they think about Amazon or Facebook or Google and, all these companies that are doing billions and billions in revenue. But the reality is 99% of the businesses in this country will never surpass $1 million in revenue, let alone anywhere near 80 million in revenue. But it's that scaling is where they get in trouble, right? They don't know how to scale. They don't know who to hire and when. They don't know when to step out of the way. There's this thing that we do in our business where we take an owner of a business through what's called the owner dependency index, right? Mm-hmm. And we have them go through and answer this questionnaire to find out how dependent the business is on them personally, right? If the score is high, that's a bad thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like golf, right? You want a lower score because the less dependent your business is on you personally day to day, the more it's worth, right?
Sure.
And it's a hard thing for people to get around. And so I guess maybe let me rephrase the question. So from a mindset standpoint, where were you in thinking, this is a risk, right? I mean, you didn't even really have the revenue that you needed to hire great individuals in executive positions. So what did you do? How did you get your mind around that? Did you take on financing? Did you take on investors to be able to do that? What was that process like?
We were able to scale at a rate that could almost, so I had one of the initial partners, 2 of us founding partners. I was the majority controller. Now the other partner is a minority partner. He was more vested early on. But we were able to use cash generated at some level. And then he is a client. So there was, if money was put in, it was from him as a primary client early on. So we were lucky that we never, surprisingly, if you looked at the trajectory, the trickiest part, and I always tell people, ironically, harder to go from, and not from the sales generation. I'm talking about from management or execution, from 0 to 1 million. We went from 1 to 2, then 2 to 10. Yep. And that 2 to 10, and then 10 to 31. So if you ask me from 2013 to 15, maybe it was, to go from 2 million to $31 million in revenue, $200 receivable size on average, highly paper, highly complex. That was the tricky part of where we went. But I knew the people we were hiring. I knew the relationships they had. And so it was not it wasn't hard, I would say. I would think relative to our size, we were in a unique position if you hire the right CIO in our industry and you get the right IT. So we really are an IT firm, I guess is the way I would answer that. It's like from a true practical, if I don't understand our industry. If you have the right IT people, which was technology you couldn't lease off the streets, think about several hundred or thousands of receivables coming in from multiple payers, and the how that works through your call center and your billing and collections team, how you pay multiple entities. Those aren't things that you just go Google and you find. So you have to find a CIO that has built it before. So the leap of faith was Breck encouraged me that, we had what it took, and then we jumped, and CIO, business leader, and it was just go time. So that's kind of how we solved it. It was not as hard. It wasn't as scary as it sounded. The scarier part was the leap of faith that we guarantee pharmacies payments before we receive them. And I very quickly went from an entrepreneur that owned a tattoo shop and flipped a couple houses and lost some money and was in a multi-level market, all the things you do in your 20s as you learn to be a business person, to like 3 or 4 years later, had families moving out of state to come work for us, had bank lines, guaranteeing national grocery store chains, millions of dollars, because we guarantee money in 30 days. Our payment cycle on average is 90 days, but it's somewhere between day 20 to never. Yeah. Right. So there's this risk of how does someone, and the short answer is, if I looked at failing, there's no way we would have did it. Right. I always say you've watched the downhill skiers that just kind of jump. How do you not hit a tree? Cause you never focus on hitting the tree. Right. Yeah. You may hit it, but you can't look at it because I would have been paralyzed. So yeah, we scaled. We probably only went upside down $250,000, let's say, in like cash flow. But at any one moment, we probably had $3, $4, $5 million at risk, having, I'm gonna say no safety net, but I guess I can say it now, 10 years later, having no safety net. So.
Yeah, that's typical of entrepreneurs, right? They're doing it with no safety net, and that's the thing is, from the outside looking in, everybody thinks that entrepreneurs are like these overnight successes, right? And all of a sudden they've got all this money, and gosh, I want to be like him, right?
Right.
And I want to build a company like his, but it's blood, sweat, and tears, and it's step by step, and it's doing all the things along the way. So, Breck, I want to transition to you. So, tell me what it was like for you coming from a large organization, 401k plan, full benefits. There may have even been a pension. I don't know, right? What was that like to have that conversation with your wife to say, "Okay, honey, we're gonna move over to this startup. I think Todd is awesome. He's bald like me. Let's go for it."
We have a lot in common. Yeah. We go to the same barber. Yeah. So, I had signed up to help community pharmacies about almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years next year. So I started in 2003. I'd signed up to help these community pharmacies, independently owned, people serving their community, and yet expanded to much larger chains as well. But we were really helping them and helping their clients or those injured workers that were coming to them for help. So when this whole program was changing, the big company I was working for, and was, I keep saying it, they truly went to the dark side. I didn't sign up for that. And so it was an easy decision for me, not as easy for my wife, but it was an easy decision for me to leave the company. And so I did. And my going away present, because I was the one guy who actually sat down with all those entities, those pharmacy entities, on 2 or 3 times a year just to do business reviews with them. My going away present was not only my non-compete that I needed to honor, but it was also a TRW, a temporary restraining order, because they didn't want me going out telling that community that I had personal relationship with what was about to happen to them. Those reimbursements that we used to give you, those $60, $70, $80 reimbursements, now they're going to be $4. Are you cool with that? So that was why I had that restraining order to shut me up. Once my wife saw that true nature of that entity, then she was on board for, let's get out of Dodge. These people only love you when they can milk you, and now, let's do something different.
Yeah. It's a different world these days. I almost kind of question the whole non-compete and, all those sorts of things, because one, they're tough to enforce. It really is just about locking somebody up in a legal battle, and are you going to be willing to pay the dollars, right? And I'm not an attorney. I have a brother-in-law that is, and we've had this conversation. But nowadays, I think about it like, okay, I can't go out and tell people that I've left one company to go to work for another company doing the exact same thing, but I can sure update my LinkedIn profile, right? And so I just question the whole reason that those even exist nowadays. So anyway, that's a topic for another time. But I want to get one last question in before we run out of time here. So the work comp fund, or working with work comp funds, my understanding, and I could be completely wrong here, but my understanding is that some states have state funds, and in some states it's private. Is that true?
Yeah, and Breck, you're the expert.
Yeah.
You can speak more to it.
So, most states will have a state fund that may be administered by someone else. So it's not a true state fund, but some states do have a true state fund, which actually is a monopoly, if you will. So like Ohio is a really good example. The Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation, they control like 98% of the lives in the entire state of Ohio. So every employer gets their work comp insurance through that state fund, and pharmacies have to bill direct to that state fund. Washington State has the same with the Washington Labor and Industry, or Washington L&I, also has a monopoly on that state. But outside of that, New York has a pretty strong one. There's a few strong ones there, but outside of that, your largest carrier is actually Liberty Mutual. So you still have the really big carriers that also cover workers' compensation. So Liberty Mutual being the largest, Travelers, Hartford would be some of the big payers. But as Todd mentioned earlier in our conversation, we have over 4,000 payers. So there could also be Bob's Pizza Shack that's self-insured. And that's a direction that we really would like to now focus on, is these self-insured employers are absolutely getting ripped off by that middleman, that pharmacy benefit manager, that PBM middleman. And we have a way of removing that middleman. You've probably seen a lot of my LinkedIn posts that say #remove the middleman, because we could actually take that PBM out of that mix and save these self-insured employers a lot of money. Okay. We can also then continue to pay our pharmacies a fair and reasonable reimbursement. You take that middleman that's putting $80 to $120 in their own pocket and split that between the two entities, meet in the middle. It's a really good win-win situation. Today, you've got a win-lose situation. The only one winning is the pharmacy benefit manager. When a PBM has gotten so large and so powerful and making so much money that it can buy the carrier, there's something wrong with that. Okay. Yeah. When your entire health system that you cover 65 million lives, and you've got companies paying into that plan, you've got employees paying into that plan, but yet your pharmacy benefit manager represents 75% of your profit, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah. So Todd said early on that there was about 25,000 of these smaller pharmacies. You guys work with about 12,000 of them. Any given month, 3,000 or 4,000 of them process some sort of transaction with you. How many of these self-employed companies are out there that are ideal clients for you guys, where it's saving them money and,
Thousands. Just here in the state of Arizona, there's, 30 or 40 fairly large employers. Both of our power companies are self-insured. Yeah. Our school districts are self-insured. Our municipalities are you're paying for that. Your our municipality where we live, Austin, anytime there's an injury in that city, we as taxpayers are paying for that. So it's self-funded. Really large trucking company right here in town, self-insured. Yeah. We could save them millions of dollars by cutting out the middleman.
Well, hopefully they hear this podcast. It's a pretty big podcast, I'm just telling you.
Awesome.
Let me make one point on that. Let me close on it. You asked Breck a question, a personal question. Here's how when you say, how do the right people work for an organization? You asked them a very personal question. How did you decide to move from a big company to a smaller? Where do you go first? Naturally.
Your wife or your spouse.
Well, spouse,
Yeah.
and then but why did he do it? He did it. He didn't speak of the company or me or what.
Right.
We have a lot of leaders, friends in the industry. We're
Didn't speak
peers.
about the money.
It was like
right?
I was here. I was solving a problem I was passionate about. The philosophy of the company changed. I was more beholden to the people I served, and you could tell how passionate he speaks for small businesses and injured workers. And it's like that was much bigger than. And it really was that for him. It wasn't. It's just a better economic situation. It is now, but he couldn't have suggested that answer. It really was a passion, which shows you have the company has the right people in leadership for the right reasons. And pharmacies pick up on it, employers pick up on it, and that's why he is who he is.
Yeah. Well, and we even hear more about that nowadays, right? Because you got the great resignation going on, and the younger generation specifically want to work for a company that is supporting a cause, right? Something that they're passionate about. Everybody has to make money. Everybody has to be able to support themselves and their families, but it's less about the money today. And it was less about the money for you, Breck, when you made the decision to leave and to join ServRX. And so it's a way to think about things differently. And as employers, we do have to build an organization that people can be proud to work for.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you guys want to add? How to get a hold of you guys? What else can we say at the end here?
I mean, absolutely. I think our next phase is really how do we help, not just the injured workers and the pharmacies who serve them, but now we have a lot of self-insured employers out there that we could help. A couple of years back, Todd had the vision to create a white glove concierge pharmacy solution to help injured workers. And so there's a lot of really cool things we can do on that side of the house that we haven't even scratched the surface on yet. Reach out to us. We're at ServRX. My email is just my first name, Breck, BRECK, at ServRX.com.
All right. Hey, thanks so much for being here, guys. Really appreciated the conversation. Look forward to following you guys as time goes on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks,
You
Austin.
bet.
You've been listening to Tycoons of Small Biz, proudly hosted by Austin Peterson and Landon Mance. Austin and Landon are comprehensive financial planning professionals specializing in financial, estate, and succession planning for small business owners. Austin and Landon have offices in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Las Vegas, Nevada, and represent clients in 14 states throughout the country. Join Austin, Landon, and the featured Tycoons live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. right here on Business Radio X and your favorite podcast platform.